Around our teenage years, some of us may grapple with the question over what exactly is the meaning of life. Such questioning may lead to very depressing results, namely that life appears devoid of meaning. Others may find the answer in a loved one, a vision, or simply may abandon the question altogether, leaving it up to bigwig philosophers to rip their hair out in search of any meaning whatsoever. In the 1930s, Viktor Frankl, a young psychiatrist preoccupied with the issue, founded a youth counseling program in Vienna. His mission was to motivate his suicidal and depressed patients to find meaning in their lives. Unlike his psychological predecessors, Freud and Adler, who believed that our motives and behavior were based upon a search for pleasure or power, Frankl interpreted our psychology as a system in search of meaning and value. With the war nearing and his position as the head of neurology in a Jewish hospital in jeopardy, the U.S. Embassy notified Frankl that he was eligible for an American visa. However, despite this, Frankl stayed in Vienna to take care of his aging parents and allowed for his visa to lapse. Shortly before 1942, Frankl began formulating an argument suggesting that an individual's mental health and well-being was based entirely on our quest for meaning. Then, in September, Frankl and his family were arrested, separated, and within 3 years, Frankl would relocate to 4 different concentration camps, including Auschwitz and Dachau. This interesting and dreadful situation, in which a highly talented and compassionate psychologist found himself subjected to the greatest and largest degradation of human life in modern history, could have ended far worse. Instead, Frankl survived his imprisonment, founded a new school of psychology, and published one of the greatest books of the 20th century, Man's Search for Meaning. In what appeared to be a hopeless situation characterized by meaningless suffering became a rebirth for Frankl. He used his perceptive and highly trained skills to document as best he could his and others' reactions to being placed in a death camp. Within the camp, he witnessed the worst and best of humankind. We have come to know man as he really is. After all, man is that being who invented the gas chambers of Auschwitz. However, he is also that being who entered those gas chambers upright with the Lord's Prayer on his lips. Frankl distinguishes 3 psychological phases one experiences in a death camp: the period following his admission, the period in which they have become entrenched in the camp routine, and finally release and liberation. In the first period, he observed that many, including himself, experienced a delusion of reprieve, in which one believes that they will spontaneously be saved. At first, this seems strange. The chance of being saved in those camps was nil. However, as he quotes Lessing, an abnormal reaction to an abnormal situation is normal behavior. Plainly put, the death camps were far from a normal situation. Secondly, the prisoners sank into apathy, which Frankl calls emotional death. This was a necessary mechanism of self-defense, according to him, where the only goal was preserving your life as well as your friends. Furthermore, the undernourishment of the prisoners led to a certain regression in their desires. Those who had once dreamt of luxury cars and romance now groaned in the middle of the night, dreaming of that extra loaf of bread. Death was tomorrow's reality, and suffering was today's. This video is sponsored by Skillshare. As we navigate the sprawling digital landscape, it's easy to get lost in the noise and chaos, sometimes even overwhelmed by the darker corners of the internet. But in the midst of all this, I've always sought opportunities for personal growth, creativity, and deeper connection. I'm grateful to today's video sponsor, Skillshare, for providing a space for conscious creation and mindful exploration. On Skillshare, you can dive into a wide range of classes, from the fun and lighthearted humor writing, Write Funny for the internet, to the more introspective and impactful creative essay writing, or even be guided by Skillshare's unique learning paths, curated sequential collections of classes designed to help you master specific skills. These learning paths have been instrumental in helping me deepen my expertise in areas like creative writing, critical thinking, and personal development. It's the perfect place to refine your thoughts, contribute meaningfully to the collective narrative, and build your own unique story. Skillshare offers thousands of courses taught by industry experts across areas like design, film, and freelancing. Whether you want to advance your career, explore a new passion, or enhance your personal skills, Skillshare has something for everyone.
What's more, Skillshare's Learn by Doing approach allows you to create and share projects, getting valuable feedback from a community of like-minded learners. By expanding your skills, you can shape your voice within the larger digital ecosystem. Join Skillshare today and start your creative journey. The first 500 people to sign up using my link get 1 month of premium for free, giving you access to thousands of courses that will help you grow, learn, and create in a way that matters.
One early morning, stumbling in the darkness amidst the shouting of guards and icy wind, a man next to Frankl joked, "If our wives could only see us now." For Frankl, this thought invigorated him. Occasionally I looked at the sky, where the stars were fading and the pink lights of the morning was beginning to spread behind a dark bank of clouds. But my mind clung to my wife's image, imagining it with uncanny acuteness. I understood now how a man who has nothing left in this world still may know bliss, be it only for a brief moment, in the contemplation of his beloved. Frankl would continue private mental conversations with his wife throughout his days of labor, and soon he found that this intensification of inner life allowed for both escape and hope. Frankl was able to disassociate and see suffering for what it truly was. A man's suffering is similar to the behavior of gas. If a certain quantity of gas is pumped into an empty chamber, it will fill the chamber completely and evenly, no matter how big the chamber. Thus, suffering completely fills the human soul, no matter whether the suffering is great or little. Therefore, the size of human suffering is absolutely relative. In this sense, Frankl embraced his experience in the camp, not as a tragic and hopeless journey to nowhere, but instead as an extreme test to our human will against ever-present suffering. It is this test where Frankl makes his greatest point. In this camp, he could no longer see man as merely a product of his surroundings. The experiences of camp life show that man does have a choice of action. In spite of one's sociological or biological conditions, Frankl believes that all of us are free within one specific and highly important domain: our ability to choose our attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's way. He argues that it is this freedom alone that gives life meaning. The other two ways of arriving to one's own existential meaning are found either through an active life, in which one realizes their value in creative work, or in a passive life, in which one finds meaning through another person or thing. In suffering, however, we are given the greatest challenge, attempting to find meaning and value within the most horrendous condition one can experience. Emotion, which is suffering, ceases to be suffering as soon as we form a clear and precise picture of it, writes Spinoza. Finding such meaning within suffering was only achievable when we stopped asking about the meaning of life and started identifying exactly what life expected from us. We needed to stop asking about the meaning of life and instead to think of ourselves as those who were being questioned by life, daily and hourly. Our answer must consist not in talk and meditation, but in right action and right conduct. Life ultimately means taking responsibility to find the right answer to its problems and to fulfill the tasks which it constantly sets for each individual. This practice of answering life's challenges with a fulfilling responsibleness was fully established in Frankl's school of psychology that he would later develop after liberation. Logotherapy asserts that man's search for meaning is the primary motivation in his life, and that this meaning is unique and specific, and that it must and can be fulfilled by him alone. Only then does it achieve a significance which will satisfy his own will to meaning. Frankl aptly identifies the emergence of existential frustration in his generation, naming it an existential vacuum. His description of modern man is just as relevant today. No instinct tells him what he has to do, and no tradition tells him what he ought to do. Sometimes he does not even know what he wishes to do. Instead, he either wishes to do what other people do, conformism, or he does what other people wish him to do, totalitarianism. Perhaps our ancestors, that had gods and monarchs to make choices for them, never felt that Sunday neurosis when the rush of a busy week has subsided and the void within ourself becomes manifest. Boredom and the anxiety of choice are perhaps the greatest targets of Frankl's logotherapy. How then can we eliminate the existential void? How can we eliminate that strange moment at 10:43 a.m. on a Saturday where you're lying in your bed staring at the ceiling, paralyzed by a sense of absolute dread and self-doubt, unable to determine what you should do that day, and then asking yourself why you should even do anything at all with your debt and divorce looming, and now your neighbor has started mowing his lawn and you want to drive a spike into his chest, but you then realize that he too is just another pitiful and weak creature cast unto this earth without his consent? What is the meaning of all this? What is the meaning of life? Maybe you should see a therapist. If you ask a logotherapist, they probably won't prescribe you pills or ask if you think that your mom is a 10. Frankl sees logotherapists as playing the role of an eye specialist rather than a painter. A painter creates for us a picture of the world as he would like interpreted. An eye specialist helps us see the world as it is. The logotherapist, in theory, would help their patients see the entire spectrum of meaning, as an eye specialist would help their patients see all spectrums of color. And if you saw a logotherapist and asked them about the meaning of life, as Frankl explains, they may tell you this: for the meaning of life differs from man to man, from day to day, and from hour to hour. What matters, therefore, is not the meaning of life in general, but rather the specific meaning of a person's life at a given moment. To put the question in general terms would be comparable to the question posed to a chess champion. Tell me, master, what is the best move in the world? In asking what the meaning of life is, we should be aware of who exactly is posing such a question in the first place. Us. Now the tables have turned. Life questions us, and we can only respond for our own lives. It is you and only you that is responsible for your life. Frankl asserts that responsibleness is the very essence of existence. He asks us to, in each moment, live as if you were living already for the second time, and as if you had acted the first time as wrongly as you are about to act now. In doing so, we see the very moment passing as something already solidified in the past, and simultaneously understand that this past can be shaped and changed, but first we must assume responsibility for it. According to logotherapy, we can discover this meaning in life in 3 different ways: by creating a work or doing a deed, by experiencing something or encountering someone, and by the attitude we take toward unavoidable suffering. This last point, an argument that Frankl established in the death camps as he endured some of the most extreme forms of suffering conceivable, makes us realize that even if we cannot change the situation at hand, we must take upon the challenge to change ourselves. However, aren't our attitudes somewhat predetermined? And yet, Frankl argues that man is not fully conditioned and determined, but rather determines himself whether he gives in to conditions or stands up to them. In other words, man is ultimately self-determining. In logotherapy, tragic optimism stands above all else as an opponent to what Frankl describes as the tragic triad of human existence, namely pain, guilt, and death. Optimism in the face of tragedy, that is, not denying that the circumstances themselves are tragic and in view of human potential, uses the triad to create meaning. Firstly, in pain, tragic optimism gives human suffering the status of an accomplishment. Secondly, tragic optimism uses guilt to help us better ourselves and find our potential. Thirdly, with death, tragic optimism allows us to see the impermanence of our own existence, and through this, we recognize that taking responsibility for our life is necessary. In his experience in the camps, where each day promised absolute suffering and hopelessness, Frankl exemplified this state of tragic optimism. Why wouldn't someone just kill themselves? As a young doctor, Frankl dealt with a great number of suicidal individuals. He estimates over 12,000. He notes that after meeting someone who had attempted suicide, they would be quick to realize that there was generally a solution to whatever problem led them to such a position, an answer to their question, or a meaning to life. He would use this to help other, more hopeless patients. Even if things only take such a good turn in 1 of 1,000 cases, who can guarantee that in your case it will not happen sooner or later? But in the first place, you have to live to see the day on which it may happen. So you have to survive in order to see that day dawn, and from now on, the responsibility for survival does not leave you. Freud believed that exposing a large and diverse group to hunger and deprivation would lead to the group blurring into one unitary mass that would only reflect one desire: to eat. However, Frankl lived through this very thought experiment and saw something very different: that individual differences magnify when challenged by miserable conditions, for both the swine and the saints. He also properly observes that the saints, more often than not, appear as a minority, and yet I see therein the very challenge to join the minority, for the world is in a bad state, but everything will become still worse unless each of us does his best. So let us be alert in a twofold sense. Since Auschwitz, we know what man is capable of, and since Hiroshima, we know what is at stake. For Frankl, the betterment of the human race starts at the individual level. Instead of blaming others, we should ask ourselves if we too would act more heroically in certain situations. We too should bear the responsibility of our own lives before labeling our search for meaning as a lost cause. Each of us are called upon, not because we are destined to improve ourselves in the situation of others, but instead because we carry the potential to do so. What then is man? Thus we ask the question again. He is a being that always decides what it is. A being that within at one and the same time the possibility of sinking to the level of an animal or of soaring to a life of near holiness. Instead of using our energy to blame others, victimize ourselves and complain, whether how tragic or insufferable our conditions are, perhaps we should be a little more quiet. In being so demanding, we achieve little. Instead, we should demand heroism only of a single person, and that is oneself.